Do you have a favorite superhero? As a kid, mine was always Spider-Man, and he still is to this day. In a lot of ways, he's sort of the perfect superhero. He's relatable, he's a great inspirational character, he's got a wide variety of villains, and his powers are just downright cool. And you know what? 2018 is a great year to be a Spider-Man fan. We've already seen the character in Avengers Infinity War, there's a Venom movie coming out, and the Into the Spider-Verse movie has won me over with that creative animation style alone. But we also have a brand new Spider-Man game coming out in September, and I've been just as excited as anyone else since it was revealed at E3 a few years ago. So, I thought it would be fun to take a look at the Wallcrawler's history in the game industry, see how he's evolved in the medium over the years. We're going to be kicking off a marathon, taking a look at all of the 3D Spider-Man games on home consoles, leading up to the new game on the PS4 being made by Insomniac. Now, I would like to take a look at the older 2D or handheld games at some point in the future, but this Spider-Man-a-thon is going to be pretty packed as it is, so that's going to be way down in the future if we get to that at all. To kick things off, we're going to be taking a look at the very first 3D Spider-Man game, one that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So, without any further delay, let's take a look at Spider-Man for the PlayStation 1. So, Spider-Man, or Spider-Man 2000 as some people call it, actually had a lot going for it when it was being developed. The game was being handled by Neversoft, who already had a pretty good track record at the time thanks to their work on the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, which actually featured Spider-Man as a playable character before this game was even made. And Marvel had a pretty big hand on the project as well, allowing the team to use a variety of characters outside of just Spider-Man himself, and even the legendary Stan Lee lends his voice to some narration for the experience.
So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
The game was released for Windows, the Sega Dreamcast, the PlayStation 1, and an altered version for the Nintendo 64. We'll be looking at the PS1 version today, as that's the version I grew up with, and from what I hear, that's the version a lot of other people are familiar with too. But before we jump into the game proper, there's something pretty important that needs to be established. The story of Spider-Man 2000 pulls from a long line of comic book history for the webhead and his enemies, so if you're not already familiar with characters like Venom, Doc Ock, Carnage, and Scorpion, this game is gonna leave you kinda lost in the narrative department, and unfortunately, I don't have the time to explain the decades of history these characters all have, so I'm just gonna have to ask that you bear with me, or that you go look up their Wikipedia pages or something. Oh, and we are reviewing the story for this game, so spoilers ahead. Our story begins with a supposedly reformed Dr. Otto Octavius giving a demonstration at some sort of exhibit where Peter Parker and Eddie Brock are working as photographers. Peter kind of speaks the mind of the whole audience and isn't really sold on the Doc's story about turning over a new leaf, but is shocked to see that someone has arrived to steal Octavius's device.
Who dares? Face me, coward! Face a worthy foe. Spider-Man?
Last time I checked, I was Spider-Man.
Peter tries to intervene, but he can't get away from the crowd that he's trapped in to switch into his Spidey outfit and save the day. Eddie tries to get photos of the thief, thinking that it's the real Wallcrawler, but his camera is destroyed and the fake Spider-Man gets away. With the exhibit floor abandoned, Brock is left in grief of yet another job gone to ruin, and his alter ego takes over, vowing to get revenge on the Spider. In some undisclosed location, we see that whoever has Octavius's device, which, oh gee, I wonder who that could be, is using the device to blanket the island of Manhattan in a dense fog, and so now we're left with our hero being hunted by the police and needing to clear his name, a mysterious fog covering the city.
I know there's been some trouble, but the bank's being robbed, and they've got hostages.
And oh, that's happening now too. Before Spider-Man can worry about his personal issues, he decides he can't leave the hostages at the bank heist to fend for themselves, and the tutorial of the game begins. The basics are all here: running, jumping, crawling on the walls like a bug of some kind, you know, the simple stuff. But for distant terrain, you're given the ability to web swing for what I kind of recognize as an elongated jump or glide. It's nothing glamorous, you can only swing on 2 threads of web before dropping, and once you're in the air, you can't change direction, but it gets the job done. And it's not often where the game puts you in a position where aiming your web swing properly is all that difficult. You have to be careful not to fall while swinging through the city though, because if you fall into the fog, it's a game over. There aren't any lives in the game, so getting a game over isn't the end of the world or anything. You just get respawned back at the last checkpoint and can go about your merry way again. On the rooftops, you're introduced to combat. While the combat in Spider-Man 2000 isn't terribly complicated, I find that there's enough here to keep it from feeling too bare bones either. You've got your basic punches and kicks, which do the job just fine, especially if you drop an attack down on an enemy from the air. But you can also use your webs in combat too, by tying up thugs, blasting web projectiles, making boxing gloves for added damage, and can even create a web dome around you that explodes and can take out a few thugs at once. Now, something I find a little concerning about fighting thugs on building tops is that I question the likelihood of survival for some of these poor souls. After making it to the bank, Spider-Man takes out the thugs there and gets the hostages free, but when you make it to the last batch of baddies,
they're messing with us. Start the timer on the bomb and take out all the hostages.
I love how ridiculous this is. Like, not only did these guys bring this massive bomb for some reason, but somehow the best solution for getting rid of it is tossing it into this giant safe and locking the door. I mean, I get that the blast probably couldn't make it out of that room, but I'm pretty sure that we're not on the ground floor of this building right now, and the vibrations from the detonation alone should be doing terrible things to the structure of this tower. At any rate, Peter calls up J. Jonah Jameson and tells him that he got pictures of the robbery, but JJ actually has some unsavory company at the time and simply cannot chat right now. So you've got to make a mad sprint over to the Daily Bugle to crash the party and keep Scorpion from murdering the poor grumpy old man. After what isn't a terribly difficult fight, the police arrive and attempt to apprehend Spider-Man, and I would comment on how them pulling out guns and immediately shooting at him seems a little excessive, but we haven't seen anything yet. Daredevil shows up and briefly interrogates Spider-Man and demands an explanation for his crimes.
Listen, it's true. A Spider-Man made off with Octavius' new invention, but not the Spider-Man, not me. Somebody's framed me. Why? I don't know yet. And if New York's finest catch me, it may be too late.
Well, then you'd better get going. NYPD is coming fast.
That's it? You believe me?
I don't have to believe you. I know you aren't lying.
But how?
Let's just say you've got your superpowers, and I've got mine.
Daredevil heads out to spread the word that Spider-Man is innocent, but then the boys in blue show up again and oh boy, do the boys in blue show up again. What follows is an absolutely ridiculous chase sequence where cops are popping out all over the place and shooting at you. You have to swing around frantically from buildings and cranes and, oh look, the Green Goblin has a secret hideout in one of these cranes. And the entire time, this helicopter is shooting bullets and firing rockets at you. Also, that music. Actually, can we take a moment to talk about the game soundtrack as a whole? Because it is fantastic. This guitar is going nuts in all of the action-oriented stages and sounds outstanding in this chase sequence, and I love this little riff that chimes in when your spider sense lets you know that there's an enemy nearby. It's great during action, but I love it in the quiet moments too. There's a great sense of atmosphere that comes with just about every track in the game, and it nails every mood it aims for, from eerie to downright blood pumping. I hate to get off topic, but this soundtrack deserves recognition. After getting away from the cops, Black Cat catches up with the webhead and gives him even more bad news. Rhino is trying to pull off a device heist of his own over at Omnitech, and at the same time, Venom has taken over the Jumbotron in Times Square to give our hero a very direct message.
So we've got this beautiful redhead. You know her. She's one of those famous bimbos. We have decided that this poor little lassie has 24 hours to live. 24 hours! Oh, by the way, her name is Mary Jane Parker.
With two villains to take out at once, Cat offers to take on Rhino herself so Spidey can go save his wife, but the man refuses and cites a line that remains one of my favorites for the character, perfectly encapsulating his determination and dedication to the responsibility he feels.
Being Spider-Man has given me a lot and taken a lot away, but one thing never changes. My responsibility to use my powers for others before myself, no matter what the cost. There are innocent people at Omnitech and they need our help right now. I won't let them down. Then I'll stop Venom.
Black Cat and Spider-Man arrive at Omnitech, but the device is already being taken away, and then Rhino shows up. Don't worry though, Black Cat is super helpful in this fight.
That leaves one question. Where's Rhino?
That ball is out of here!
After knocking out the lug, the cops show up with Octavius of all people who help secure the big guy. Black Cat is taken away on a stretcher by a couple of paramedics that—
Sweet Mother Teresa on the hood of a Mercedes-Benz!
Ever since I was a kid, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why these guys look so hideous. Like, I get the idea we should be taking away from this is that these are goons of the main villain and not real paramedics, but did they really have to look like this? Anyway, so Cat's taken out of commission and Mary Jane is still missing. Johnny Storm tries to reassure Spidey that everything will be alright, and the arachnid goes off to clear his head. Suddenly, Venom actually finds him, and so begins a trend in Spider-Man games that haunts me to this very day. Character chases. Swing around on rooftops and don't let the other character get too far away from you. Okay, that might not sound so bad, but it's not particularly interesting, which is my biggest problem with it. And when web swinging controls the way it does in this game, it can be downright frustrating. The worst part about this chase is that after Venom and Spider-Man crash through this building, they come out and Venom just takes off, but Spidey, what you doing, man? You know, I used to think this was a glitch with my copy of the game, but I'm actually using a different PlayStation 2 than I was as a kid, and a different copy of this game, so it couldn't have just been me, right? Has anyone else had this problem? After catching up to Venom, the two of you tussle for a little bit, and then he gets tired and decides to jump into video game cliche number 12. The sewers. This part of the game drags on for a bit longer than I feel it really needed to. I mean, parts of it are cool. There's all these escaped experiments of the lizard on the loose down there, and there's even this really fun sequence when you're on top of a subway train and just going to town on these things. It is a little troubling though. Again, the lizard's whole deal is that he wants to turn all humans into lizard people like him, right? So these are presumably New York civilians. I mean, we're not gonna cure them, or at least try to take them out by non-lethal means? I guess not. Let's just knock them off this fast-moving train underground. It's fine. You have to drag through these sewers for a while. Honestly, it feels like about a third of the game's length is just down here, and the appeal wears off pretty quickly. Between this and the Venom chase, the middle section of the game is kind of the weak point in my eyes, but don't worry, things are about to pick up again. Once you've caught up to where Venom is keeping Mary Jane, there's a neat boss fight where you not only have to fight Venom, but you also have to keep pressing these buttons to ensure the water levels don't rise high enough to drown your wife. After the fight is over, Spider-Man very calmly explains to Venom that there was a misunderstanding about the tech heist.
You're the bad guy this time.
You idiot! Think, Eddie.
Venom owns up to his mistake, and the two characters briefly team up and try to find who the real culprit behind everything is.
Who could have wanted to steal Octavius's technology?
Ooh, we know!
Who?
The Submariner.
Submariner? Get serious, will you?
The mighty Thor.
Are you out of your mind? Don't answer that.
Galactus.
Forget it, Eddie.
The two decide that their best bet is to break into the Daily Bugle and try to find the database there to help them find the perpetrators, but Venom is caught off guard when he detects the presence of his dangerous counterpart, Carnage. He takes off immediately and tries to track down the sociopath, but Spider-Man is left with a problem of his own. Whoever is behind everything has managed to unleash symbiotes on the Daily Bugle, which I think is a fantastic idea for a Spider-Man story. A single symbiote bonding to a person like Eddie Brock or Cletus Cassidy has created two of the most dangerous enemies Spider-Man has ever faced, so the idea of a full-blown invasion of the creatures is actually kind of terrifying by implication alone. Apparently, I'm not the only one that thought this, because this is not the last time we're going to see a plotline like this in a Spider-Man game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The wall crawler brawls his way through the Bugle, beating up the slime balls and freeing hostages until he discovers the symbiote-generating machines that have been placed all over the basement of the building. After destroying all of them, he finally runs into his doppelganger and gives chase, discovering that the imposter Spider-Man was Mysterio all along. And you know what? I actually really like this boss fight too. You have to jump around from all these different levels as you target the different weak spots of Mysterio's armor until the enemy of all fashion sense finally goes down. Mysterio reveals that his employer plans on sending out his symbiotes all over the city, and the fog that was released at the beginning of the game was actually meant to prepare the citizens to become ideal hosts for symbiosis, leading Spidey to have the appropriate response.
Oh, where? Where are they coming from?
Where are they? Go then, on the waterfront. Warehouse 65. A secret passage. If only I could watch them destroy you.
With some added help from the Punisher, Spider-Man is able to locate the warehouse where the symbiotes are coming from, leading into one of my favorite sections of the game. The tone of the game feels a lot more ominous now, and the threat of the symbiotes has a great foreboding nature that hangs over you even in this brightly lit environment. The more you explore the warehouse, the deeper underground you go, and eventually, you find yourself in this hilariously amazing James Bond villain-esque underwater base. I love how over the top it is. I think it fits in perfectly with some of the older material that the Amazing Spider-Man comic universe was dealing with, and the discovery of the base feels satisfying to me every single time I see it. With just a little more exploration, you find a control room where Black Cat is being held prisoner and the tech that's creating the fog is being kept. After overloading the systems in the base, the fog machine breaks down and the whole place goes into red alert, with the immense pressure starting to strain on the facility. Black Cat breaks out and goes off to get help, and Spider-Man marches onward to finish this. Spider-Man confronts the two villains behind this evil scheme, and surprise, surprise, it was Doc Ock and Carnage. Couldn't have seen that one coming. Octavius explains that he wants to create a new world, one where human beings and symbiotes cohabitate, presumably under his rule. But seeing how unruly and dangerous Spider-Man knows the symbiotes are, he's not having any of that, and that's when Venom finally shows back up. He and Carnage go have themselves a little chit-chat, and Spider-Man takes on the Mad Doctor. The fight is fine, if a bit simple. Still, there's enough going on here to keep the player engaged, and earning the chance to wail on Doc Ock a bit is great. After the scientist is finally defeated, Spider-Man takes a moment to wonder how Venom is holding up. Not well. Carnage grabs the web head, and I think this is a good example of a boss fight where you have to use your brain a bit and nail down your timing, placement, and exercise some caution when fighting the villain. He's not as much of a pushover as the others, but with enough effort, he goes down just like all the rest. The day is saved, the Carnage symbiote retreats, and Spider-Man can finally...
What the... Is that Ock?
Holy crap, I love this so much. So the Carnage symbiote decided that Cletus Cassidy was weak sauce and bonded with Doc Ock instead, creating one of the most horrifying things I ever saw as a child. This abomination spends the whole next level chasing after you and screaming as you try to escape both it and the exploding base around you. I love how after Doc Ock tried to concoct this giant plan to use the symbiotes to his advantage, the ending of the game shows him being completely taken over by one and being transformed into this sick, grotesque animal that only wants to see Spider-Man dead. Once you escape a large explosion, the flames engulf Octavius and the symbiote slithers away, leaving the Doctor broken and defeated. Spidey takes the man and tries to leave the base, but yeah, that would just be a bit too easy, wouldn't it? Luckily, Venom and Black Cat were able to get a hold of the Avengers, and Captain America shows up in a Quinjet to rescue you at the last second. But wait, now that I think about it, is Carnage just dead now? I mean, Cletus Cassidy was just left unconscious there, and his symbiote was either too far away to help him or got burned away by the fire, so... Seems a little darker to me now than it did when I was a kid. No time to worry about that. Our heroes finally get to sit down and enjoy a little bit of leisurely time together by playing a game of Go Fish like civilized adults.
Look who's talking, Daredevil. You've been looking at my cards all night.
I don't need to look at your cards, Punisher. Your bluffs are so obvious.
And the villains are doing the same, mocking each other for the failed plan thanks to Spider-Man and, oh yeah, that's kind of funny. With Doc Ock left with nothing but shame and a bunch of idiot cellmates, our story has ended. Alright, now a lot of you might already know the answer to this, but do I recommend this game? Absolutely. Not a perfect story? The villain reveal is given away at the beginning. The first couple of missions feel sort of like a detour, and I'm left to wonder if there were any more symbiote generators out there that we never destroyed. But you know what? I still thought it was a lot of fun. It's the sort of story that you would expect to get out of a comic book or a superhero cartoon, and I'm sure that's exactly what this game was going for. Still, outside of the one scene I mentioned earlier, I don't really feel like there's much of a through line, or like there was much done with Spider-Man as a character. He doesn't really develop in any way or learn any lessons, but for this game, I guess that's okay. I just would have liked it if maybe there was some inner conflict about how betrayed Spider-Man felt by the public after everything that he'd been willing to do for them, and they still threw him under the bus. Major props to the presentation though, especially for the time period. Character models constantly have their hands in a fist and can't move their mouths outside of the symbiote characters, so I mean that looks goofy, but the PlayStation had limitations and that's understandable. The cutscenes still look great, the characters move around well, and you can always clearly tell what's going on. The voice performances are solid too. To this day, I can't think of Venom as a character without hearing Darren Norris's voice.
Ooh, I smell bad symbiote, and it ain't me.
The writing is snappy and quippy, and everything feels like it moves at a comfortable pace.
Here it is, the records room.
Surf the web, surf the web.
Shut up, Brock, we don't have time.
There are some gameplay quirks, such as not being able to explore below the tops of buildings, and web swinging does feel kind of clunky, and for real, that sewer section had no business being that long. But all in all, I think the developers really nailed it, creating a fun, memorable, and rewarding experience that truly lets you feel like Spider-Man.
I also have to commend all the extra material that you can unlock too, like all the new suits that give you different powers or just kind of look funny. The character viewer where you can see character models and have the great Stan Lee give you a quick summary of who they are, and you can even unlock storyboards which all look fantastic. I mean, you can really feel the love that went into every single aspect of this game. Spider-Man 2000 holds up surprisingly well over time and is just as much fun to play now as it was 18 years ago.
Now this actually wasn't the end for Spider-Man on the PlayStation 1. So in the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at its sequel, Spider-Man 2, Enter Electro. I hope you all join me then, we're going to keep this marathon going. Before I log off today though, I'd like to take a second off script. Just earlier this week, Steve Ditko, a great writer over at Marvel Comics, tragically passed away. He had a pretty good run, about 90 years. A lot of people don't get to live that long, but he didn't waste that time either. He helped create Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, lots of other characters, and wrote some of the most iconic stories for those characters. Without him, we wouldn't have Spider-Man, we wouldn't have these games. This marathon wouldn't exist, and so I'd like to, just take the time to recognize him, and just to kind of say thank you for his contribution to something that we all love. With all of that said, thank you so much for joining me on this. I'm excited to keep this marathon going, and I'll see you next mission.
Thank you for playing. Would you like to try again?